A damaging climb down or a reality check? The Palestinian president has dramatically softened his demands for a settlement freeze in return for peace talks with the Israelis. But why is he backtracking now? And will it get results? This is Inside Story. Hello to you. Welcome to the programme. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Mahmoud Abbas seems to be signalling a desire for a compromise over the thorny issue of settlements. Up till now, the Palestinian president has resolutely refused all negotiations with Israel until it stops building Jewish settlements for 12 months, including in East Jerusalem. But this week, he seemed to perform a U-turn, telling a British newspaper that he would return to direct talks if Israel halted building for 3 months. And he repeated his new position at a press conference in Berlin, adding he was also against armed resistance.
I will continue to forbid armed resistance. As the Palestinian Authority, we do not believe in the notion of armed uprising or an armed struggle. We believe in peaceful resistance, which is recognized by international laws. This has nothing to do with the issue of negotiations. If Israel stops settlement constructions for a certain period, and there is a clear vision about the terms of reference, then we will be prepared to resume these negotiations.
Meanwhile, on Wednesday, a rare joint event between top Israeli and Palestinian ministers was taking place in the Israeli city of Herzliya. The National Security Conference saw Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad shaking hands with Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, the man who had guided Israel's war on Gaza last year. Barak had an unusually blunt warning for his country. He said a two-state solution was critical for Israel's future.
The simple truth is that if and in the event that this territory is west of the Jordan River, there is only one state called Israel, it will be at the end of the day either not Jewish or not democratic. If this bloc has millions of Palestinians with their own national vote in elections, this is a binational state par excellence. If this bloc of millions of Palestinians west of the Jordan River do not vote, this is an apartheid state par excellence. Neither of those two options are the Zionist dream.
Well, let's discuss these issues. Joining me from London, we have Manuel Hassassian. He's the PLO's ambassador to Britain. Professor Shmuel Sandler, the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at Bar Ilan University, joins us from Jerusalem. And in Chicago, we're joined by Ali Abunimah. He's the co-founder of electronicintifada.net and author of One Country, a bold proposal to end the Israeli-Palestinian impasse. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Let's start with Mahmoud Abbas's statements earlier this week. Manuel, is this a substantial change in stance? Has he bowed to US pressure to compromise?
No, I don't think so. It has not been pressured by the United States. I think this is a genuine gesture by the President, President Mahmoud Abbas. We were talking about the terms of reference, 1967 borders. We're talking about land swaps. We're talking about halting of settlement activities. We are just trying to reiterate what we have accepted in the first phase of the roadmap. These are conditions that we have accepted. We fulfilled our end of accepting the roadmap.
But this concept of 3 months, a halt to building settlements for 3 months, that's new, isn't it? That time
well,
frame?
the question, you know, I was with the president when Sheamus made that interview, and the president, you know, when he said settlement activities should stop, he said 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. He said it is immaterial, but the principle of halting settlement activity is a good precursor for re-engaging in a political process. So the question is not 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. Once settlement activity is halted, then we can take the Israeli side as serious enough to re-engage in a political process.
Shmuel, what will the Israelis make of this offer? I'm assuming because Mr. Abbas is still including East Jerusalem in this, that they won't be tempted by this.
Well, I think that Mr. Abbas, like many of the more moderate Palestinian leadership, now realizes that from Mr. Obama's big speeches, at the beginning, nothing moved. And Mr. Obama is a bright man, and he understands that after a year in which he turned to the Muslim world and the Palestinians, nothing happened. So I think the Palestinians are realizing that they have to go back to negotiations. What they did with Prime Minister Olmert, there were settlements activities throughout the Olmert administration, and Israel and the Palestinians were negotiating. I think it was only that since Mr. Netanyahu came into power and Mr. Obama also came into power that they stopped. Now they realize that they must go back, and they should go back, because it's the interest of both sides to continue negotiations. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't start it because of some settlement activities which Mr. Netanyahu gave more than Mr. Olmert. Olmert never gave any freeze, and Netanyahu was ready to freeze it for 10 months.
Ali, how do you think Palestinians are going to react to this? He's already been criticised by a Hamas parliamentarian for backtracking. How will it go down with his people?
Well, not well, and that's exactly his problem. Abbass is trying to save his skin. His problem is that as he relied on President Bush to no effect, he also relied on the promises of Barack Obama that the United States would insist on a full Israeli settlement freeze. Barack Obama, unfortunately, hung Mahmoud Abbas out to dry and left him in this situation where he faces the prospect of going back to totally meaningless negotiations which have no prospect whatsoever of reaching any destination, or holding out against negotiations. And the problem with that is that Abbass gets all his legitimacy now from Israeli and American support, not from the support of the Palestinian people. His term of office, of course, expired more than a year ago. So this is his problem, is how to balance the demand from his how to balance the demand of his American sponsors with the need to maintain some fig leaf of legitimacy in front of the Palestinian people, who are still angry at the way he turned his back on the Goldstone report under Israeli and US pressure. And the other thing that is creeping up on Abbass is the competition from Salam Fayyad, the appointed Ramallah Prime Minister, who is increasingly getting more of the Israeli and American support that used to be directed at Mahmoud Abbas. And we saw with the very public
shaking his head
handshake between Fayyad and Ehud Barak yesterday, the danger to Mahmoud Abbas from a more compliant Fayyad leadership.
Shamil, you've got a reaction to that?
Yeah. First of all, I disagree, because if you look back, all the accomplishments of the Palestinians were through negotiations. If you look back, Oslo and then other negotiations which took place, whether in Washington and other places, the Palestinians moved ahead and had big accomplishments. I mean, what other...
Palestinians don't see the doubling of settlements
that didn't bring to anything.
And
that, I think, was an accomplishment.
Palestinians don't see the doubling of settlements as an accomplishment. And that's what happened since Oslo, Professor Sandler, a more than doubling of the number of settlers in the West Bank. And this continues. Just the other day, your Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in Ariel, an illegal colony in the heart of the West Bank, and declared it the eternal capital of so-called Samaria. These are not the words of a state or a government that has any interest or seriousness in negotiations. So the notion of going back to negotiations, there were more than 200 negotiating sessions between the Abbas leadership and the Olmert government, which achieved absolutely nothing. So no Palestinian in their right mind would agree to go back to meaningless negotiations which provide a cover for the conversion of the rest of the West Bank into Israeli colonies.
Let's just have a look at the US position on this. The apparent softening of the Palestinian position echoes that of the US administration.
The situation for the Palestinian people is intolerable.
In what was seen as a landmark speech in Cairo last June, Barack Obama declared that Israel had to halt all settlement activity. In September, the US president brought his Palestinian counterpart and the Israeli prime minister together in New York. Instead of reiterating his demand for a freeze on settlements, he urged the Israelis to show restraint and called on both sides to restart formal negotiations. And in November, Hillary Clinton caused fury in the Arab world when she praised what she called Benjamin Netanyahu's unprecedented concessions and backed Israel's position that settlement building shouldn't prevent peace talks. Manuel, what do you make of the US position and the US softening of its demand that settlements have to be halted? And did Barack Obama set the bar too high?
I think you know what happened basically is that the Palestinians were totally disappointed with Barack Obama's policy after 1 year. We have heard that he wanted the settlement freeze, then he backed off for settlement restraint. And of course, for reasons that we understand. Domestically, there are a lot of pressures on President Obama, coming from the neocons, coming from AIPAC, from all kinds of lobbyist groups. And we have seen how they have fought him on his healthcare plan and what have you. Now, the problem with the initial discussion is that, you know, I'm really surprised by Mr. Abu Ni'mi when he talks about Salam Fayyad as if Salam Fayyad is running a government and my president is running another government. He has to understand that Salam Fayyad basically implements the government, the policies of President Mahmoud Abbas. We are one government, one authority, and we cannot try basically to create a wedge between both.
There is a question over Mahmoud Abbas's legitimacy, though, isn't there?
Yes, well, is Hamas legitimate? Is the Legislative Council legitimate? There is no legitimacy now. We are in a state of utter confusion because there is no legitimacy if we talk about legitimacy. Also, the Legislative Council is not legitimate. The Palestinian National Council is not legitimate. Therefore, the president has to deal with issues based on the modus operandi. And Mahmoud Abbas did not change his positions. Basically, all he's saying that he is sticking to the roadmap which he had fulfilled in terms of security and economic development. The Israelis had not fulfilled their share of halting settlements, opening institutions, and removing the roadblocks. Now, the pressures are being put by the Americans on Netanyahu to create the conducive conditions by the 5 CBMs that he has mentioned, the stopping of incursions into the West Bank, the halting of any kind of settlement activity, the removal of checkpoints, the releasing of political prisoners. These are pressures that were put by President Barack Obama on Prime Minister Netanyahu in order to initiate what we talk the proximity talks, which is the initial stage towards basically being re-engaged in a full political process. But President Mahmoud Abbas did not quit his position on the freezing of settlements. He is still serious about resigning and not running for elections. And he is still with the Palestinian national aspirations of having an independent state on the borders of 1967, June 1967, with land swaps, and everything is negotiable. This is the position of Mahmoud Abbas.
In on
it
that.
has not been changed.
Shmuel, Mahmoud Abbas has said that... sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Mahmoud Abbas has said that he will resign if the peace process doesn't get on track. Does that leave the Israelis with a problem of who they might have to deal with if not Mahmoud Abbas?
No, but let me start saying I think you're downgrading Mr. Fayyad's accomplishments. I mean, Mr. Fayyad has had a lot of accomplishments. The economy of the West Bank is the only one who has been growing during the crisis, and life on the West Bank has been improving. And I think.
But the Israelis aren't negotiating with Salam Fayyad, are they? I mean, it's Mahmoud Abbas that they would be signing any agreement with.
We're ready to negotiate with everybody except. We are ready to negotiate with everybody that accepts our existence.
Really,
I mean,
the Israelis aren't worried by if Mr. Abbas steps down, who they might have to deal with, or if there's a power vacuum?
I don't think that Mr. Abbas is so naive to step down. He understands it's in the interest of the Palestinian people to have a leader like him. And a leader like Mr. Fayyad, who is accepted in the West,
and if by some miracle there are elections before peace talks, then he won't be in place to negotiate with the Israelis.
I heard many politicians who said that they are not ready to run again, and at the end they were convinced to run. And I think that we have to take again, we have to appreciate the accomplishments of both, of Mr. Fayyad and Mr. Abbas, in terms of what's good for the Palestinians.
Okay, let's
compare
move
their
this
situation to what's going on in the Gaza.
Let's move this discussion in
and you see who is
another
doing
direction.
better and who is.
Okay,
and as a result, excuse me, and the fact that Mr. Fayyad came to Herzliya is very important. It's very important here. He meets the Israeli technical elite and the national security elite, and they meet him and they find a common language. And this is very important, how two people should start living one next to the other and understanding each other.
Okay.
And I think that's
well, let's have a look at the
don't
Israelis'
downgrade
position.
Mr. Fayyad.
Last November, the Israelis offered a partial settlement freeze for 10 months, which excluded East Jerusalem. That was then rejected by the Palestinians. Last month, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticised the Palestinian leadership for refusing to re-enter peace talks. He said, and I quote, "The Palestinians have climbed up a tree and they like it up there. We bring ladders to them. The higher the ladder, the higher they climb." Ali, you're Palestinian. Do you like being up a tree, as Benjamin Netanyahu says?
Well, I mean, the irony is, just to refer to the previous point, that the only group that Israel is negotiating seriously with at the moment happens to be Hamas over an exchange of prisoners of war. So all the talk about negotiation, those are the only serious negotiations on whose results people have been waiting on a day-by-day and hourly basis. With regard to Netanyahu's statement, you know, the issue here is who is really up the tree. The notion that Palestinians of the West Bank are living in a paradise, go and see in Bil'in every day the night raids, the stormtroopers coming in during the night and arresting the non-violent demonstrators, arresting the Palestinian Mandelas like Abdullah Abu Rahma and Jamal Jum'a and Muhammad Uthman and so many others, the hundreds of non-violent activists who have been rounded up and jailed by the occupation. And to talk about the West Bank as being in a good situation is an outrage. But really, when you look strategically, let's talk about what's happening strategically. The bind is, of course, that as Ehud Barak said at the Herzliya conference, the whole of historic Palestine, or what Professor Sandler might call Eretz Israel, right now has almost a Palestinian majority. And as time passes, it will have a Palestinian majority. And Israel really has no long-term strategy except what it calls conflict management, which is to bomb the Palestinians into submission, to try to fence them in, to keep building settlements and hope that there will be some...
Ehud Barak said. He said that without a two-state solution, Ehud Barak was saying that you needed a two-state solution. He was saying to Israel, there has to be a two-state solution or you'll end up with a Jewish minority or apartheid. What do you make of that?
Right. Well, what I make of it is that Ehud Barak should recognize that Israel is already an apartheid state. You already have more than 5 million Palestinians living among 5 million Israeli Jews, and Palestinians have been deprived for decades of the most fundamental civil, political, national, cultural, and social rights. So to say it will be an apartheid state is nonsense. It is and already has been an apartheid state. The problem is that's how Ehud Barak talks in front of the TV cameras. But what does he do? Excuse me.
No, I'm sorry. You're just creating
in many parts of the country, they live among each other. And of course, the settlers live throughout the West Bank, all over the West Bank. This was a deliberate strategy to make the country unpartitionable. But here's the problem, is Ehud Barak talks about a two-state solution, but he, as the defense minister, is the one approving every single day new institutions, new settler roads, new settlements throughout the occupied West Bank. So Israel has decided and chosen a one-state solution, and it's up to us now to fight for it to be a place where everybody, Palestinians and Jews, have equal rights.
Well, Shmuel clearly doesn't agree with that.
Of course not. I mean, the West Bank is totally separate from mainland Israel. The Gaza Strip is totally separated. There are two entities living next to each other, next to us, and the roads we are building are also for both sides. It's not, we're not building only for Jews. We're building also for Arabs. And look, and I think if you compare the economic situation of both Israeli Arabs and Palestinians in the West Bank, they are among the best in the Arab world, except
Manuel,
maybe
let me bring Manuel in. What do you think of this discussion? Because I mean, I have to say, you wouldn't have heard a top-ranking Israeli official making such a statement 5 years ago. So what do you make of what Ehud Barak had to say?
Well, first of all, what Ehud Barak was saying, this is political realism. He has to understand that there will never be a military solution to this conflict. He understands that through negotiations, we are going to have our independent Palestinian state on the 4th of June 1967 borders. Let us straighten the records here. We cannot have these misperceptions and distortions about the land of milk and honey in the West Bank. The West Bank is being Bantustan, it has been, divided into 3 Bantustans with 625 military checkpoints. We have our people steadfasting against the building of this apartheid wall. We cannot talk about economic development in the West Bank while the Israelis are controlling, every single movement that we have. Now, the question here, if you want to put it into a relative context, yes, the economic situation in the West Bank is better than Gaza because Gaza is under siege, under total blockade. We cannot really try to transfer, and even if we transfer, any kinds of food and subsistence, it's at the mercy of the Israelis. 58% of our economy is being, spent on Gaza. But we cannot say that people in the West Bank are living at ease. No, they cannot move. They cannot go to Jerusalem. They cannot,
okay, gentlemen, we've got very little time left, and I just want to ask one last question to each of you. George Mitchell, the US envoy, has offered proximity talks where he shuttles back and forth between the two sides in the hopes that that will bring face-to-face talks closer. Ali, very quickly, do you think there is any prospect of a new round of peace talks here?
They may go through the motions, but the results will be zero, and George Mitchell should save his time and dignity and give up this useless charade.
Shmuel, what do you say?
No, I think if the Palestinians would start negotiations and we can start moving ahead, this is the only way we can move. And I repeat, if you look at the history of the Palestinian people and the Israeli and the Palestinian-Jewish conflict, Palestinians always gained from negotiations. Look where they are today and where they were 40 years ago, where nobody accepted them even in the Arab world. I mean, from 48 until 67, the Arabs controlled these areas. No Palestinian state was established.
Okay.
After that, there was a fight. There was a guerrilla war, and they didn't get anywhere. It's only when they go to negotiations they're accomplished, and they are much better off today.
Okay, Shmuel, we're running out of time. Sorry to cut you off there. Let me ask what Manuel thinks.
Actually, we don't seek negotiations for the sake of negotiations. We need to know the end game. And if Israel is serious to re-engage in a political process, the end game is very clear. An independent Palestinian state. What we need is timelines and mechanisms of implementation. If the Israelis are not serious, then President Mahmoud Abbas is not willing to put his neck again for negotiations that will end up being nothing for the Palestinians.
Okay, gentlemen, a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Manuel Hassassian, Shmuel Sandler and Ali Abunimah. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As ever, we love to hear your comments and suggestions, so do email us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for the moment, from me, Shuli Ghosh, bye-bye for now.